everybody for joining us. We are here with Sourcepass to talk about understanding today's cybersecurity threat landscape and some techniques on how we can apply some mitigation strategies for small and mid-sized businesses and how we can get ready to have a little bit better cybersecurity posture. We just tell you a little bit about what we're going to cover today. We'll do a quick introduction to the two of us. We're going to talk a little bit about who Sourcepass is, just so you have an idea where we're coming from. We'll talk about today's threat landscape, kind of get an understanding of what we're seeing out there in the market, what the industry is telling us as well. Talk about kind of the impact of cybersecurity insurance and how that has altered some of the approaches that companies take as they try to bolster their cybersecurity posture. We'll also talk about kind of what that translates into as far as modern security requirements. We'll talk about some important considerations as you take the next couple of steps forward and just how to get started. And then we'll have time for Q&A at the end. But throughout the presentation, if you have questions, please use the Q&A function within Teams. And we will surface your questions and see if we can answer them in real time. And if we don't get to them in the middle, we'll certainly get to them at our Q&A session at the end. Of course, it's October, so it's Cybersecurity Awareness Month. So this is a timely topic. So we're really happy to be talking about that. And as we complete the webinar today, we will be sending out a survey, and we love your feedback. We asked a couple of quick questions on quality of it and also some follow-up questions that we're just interested in. So we appreciate your participation on that. And then lastly, at the end of the event, we will be posting the video online in case you want to share that with other people in your organization. So let me get started. My name is Daniel Johnson. I'm the Senior Vice President for the Western US for Sourcepass. I've been in the managed IT services industry for quite a while, about 25, 30 years. I'm the former CEO of Machine Logic, which is a company that joined Sourcepass back in 2023, brought some of our cybersecurity expertise to the equation. Very commonly speak at industry events, and I spent a little bit of fun time on the side being a weekend drummer and music producer. So that's a little bit insight into me. But I'm also pleased to introduce Rob Villano. Why don't you give us a little intro there, Rob, and tell people all about yourself.
Thanks, Dan, and welcome everyone. My name is Rob Villano. I'm the vCIO and cybersecurity advisor here at Sourcepass. I am a subject matter expert for protecting the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of sensitive data, also for compliance requirements thereof in industry verticals such as healthcare and financial services. I have achieved a couple of cybersecurity certifications as listed. And on the personal side, I'm a college football fan, loved saltwater fishing, and enjoy traveling. So welcome, everyone.
This is kind of your time of the year, right? This college
Absolutely.
football.
Absolutely. It's my favorite time of the year.
Good deal. Well, thanks for joining us. I appreciate it, Rob. Just give you folks a little bit of information about Sourcepass. Sourcepass is one of the fastest growing managed service providers in the industry. We focus in on fully managed IT for small and mid-sized business, co-managed IT for customers that might have existing IT staff or existing relationships but need to fill in some gaps here and there. We have a keen focus on cybersecurity. We have a number of packages that we offer, whether that's just managing everyday security posture, but also security advisory and compliance services if you're in a compliance vertical, or if, for instance, you have investors or cybersecurity insurance requirements that many companies these days have. We can help you with that. Being an MSP, we focus a lot on productivity solutions like Microsoft 365 and other productivity apps. We help folks to migrate to the cloud, whether that's Azure or AWS or other platforms. And then we spend a fair amount of time once we get our baselines in security and support going in transforming businesses so they can really take advantage of the latest versions of cloud platforms, cloud applications, and more modern security tools. To give a snapshot about who we are, like I mentioned, we're a fast-growing MSP. We have just about 600 employees a little over 2,500 clients. We try to treat them well. They treat us well as in kind. We've got a very good customer satisfaction rating. We support customers throughout the continental U.S. and beyond. We have some international customers as well, but we like to really in the markets where we have a physical presence, we like to be that local partner that's just down the street that gets to know you. So it's very important for us, even though we have broad reach and deep services, we still want to be that firm that's right there by your side. We're very focused on cybersecurity, and as part of that, we've achieved some great certifications, the SOC 2 Type 2 and ISO 27001 certifications, which might sound like a lot of gibberish, but really what that translates into is that we have internal security and controls and policies that help protect our data, our customers' data, and our vendors' data, so that we run a secure shop. And then we're involved in a number of vertical industries, whether that's healthcare, finance, insurance, manufacturing, law enforcement, and a wide variety of other vertical markets. Lastly, as to wrap up our intro a little bit, beyond that certification that I just mentioned, we are a Microsoft solutions partner with designations in modern work and in Azure infrastructure. And really, a lot of what we're going to be talking about today is applicable to a number of other platforms, but we focus in a lot on the Microsoft ecosystem. And so you'll see us referring to a couple of those aspects throughout our discussion. So just kind of start to get into the meat of everything. Wanted to talk a little bit about what the current security landscape really looks like. So when we look at, when we zoom out and kind of look at what most businesses are faced with, we see some interesting stats here. 300% increase in ransomware attacks. Nearly 1 in 4 businesses saying they had a security incident or a breach in the past year. And rising costs of those breaches. Rob, just to get you into the conversation here, I think there's a common misconception, especially with smaller businesses, that I'm too small to be a target. What maybe all the cybersecurity stuff's a little overblown. What's your thoughts on that?
Well, you're never too small. If you have an internet connection, you are a target. If you store, process, or transmit any type of data that's sensitive, or even these days not, you're a target. So it pays to be vigilant, whether you're small, medium, or large.
Yeah, I agree. And I think sometimes it's you're not too small for the attackers, but you just might be too small to make the news, right?
Well said. Well said.
I think that's kind of a common theme that we've heard in the cybersecurity circles. So as we look at some of the things that are happening within the industry, we see some increased requirements being asked. Sometimes it's investors, sometimes it's insurance companies asking that they want better cybersecurity posture because they're seeing these increases across the board. And I think some of the interesting ones, that kind of hit me is that there's more human operated attacks. These aren't just automated scripts that are running to see if they can get into something. They're well engineered social engineering attacks where they're sitting in a system for a while, understanding how you work, and then exploiting. I mean, is that kind of what you're seeing as well, Rob?
Absolutely. You hear the headlines only after the attack has been successful. But in many cases, threat actors have been in your environment for months, in fact. And so it pays to understand your profile, your environment, egress and ingress into your environment, and those monitoring solutions that are also important to understand what's taking place within it.
Yeah, and it's interesting that, across the board, we're seeing rising costs, rising threats, rising incidents. And so it just seems to be, even though people are starting to put the right defenses in place, the attackers are not stopping. They're not sleeping.
It's a 24/7, 365 endeavor for them.
Yeah, for sure. So speaking of that, just to kind of round out some of that summary of what that threat landscape really looks like, we've kind of boiled it down to some simplistic statistics that are a little easier to understand because cybersecurity can be confusing. But but 90% of cybersecurity attacks start with an email phishing attempt. That's a pretty strong statistic to say we really need still in 2024, looking at 2025, we still have to be very diligent around email. But there's over 156,000 business email compromises happening every day. These are statistics straight from Microsoft.
Yeah.
And a lot of these attacks, 80 to 90% of them are coming from unmanaged devices. So sometimes that's a personal device, but sometimes that's just a poorly managed corporate device.
Right.
And so we're going to talk a little bit about some of the tools and techniques in order to kind of shore that up a little bit. And that 70% of the attacks happened within companies that are less than 500 employees. So kind of dispelling the myth that this only happens to big companies. It happens to companies of all sizes, all verticals. So.
Absolutely.
So I'll give a little summary slide here, and then we're going to kind of dig into each of these. But what we did is we took a look at a couple of things. We looked at some of the cybersecurity insurance questionnaires that are common. We kind of pulled all of those questions that are asked, kind of put them all on one big sheet and categorize them. So we can kind of go through that, and then kind of we're going to talk about how we address each of those. But we're also seeing this is not just a cyber insurance issue. We see this commonly in mergers and acquisitions, or just investors coming into a business that they want these types of protections in place because they want to make sure their investment's safe. And as mergers and acquisitions happen, they certainly want to maintain data privacy and make sure that they're not stepping in, merging systems in a way that's not safe for their company or for their clients. So some of the top ones that we're going to talk about a little bit, and without going over it too deeply, is we're going to talk a little bit about the impact of identity and authentication, take a look at your infrastructure, talk about security operations, assessments and education, how we look from a high level, talk a little bit about data, how we handle data, how we treat it, how we back it up, these types of things, what kind of policies we have in place from an organizational perspective, and what do our business operations really look like around all of this. So just to jump in a little bit, identity and authentication is probably one of the most important pieces. And there's some interesting stats here that, multi-factor authentication prevents 99% of identity attacks. But, I think that identity is changing. Like Rob, I think we've traditionally been logging into servers, but now we're logging into the cloud. And kind of the attack surface has changed that yes, we still have to be careful about our servers and our on-premise infrastructure, but it seems like more of the targeted attacks are towards identity.
Yeah, absolutely. And so if you talk to the cyber insurance carriers, they'll tell you that MFA is the most important control that an organization can have, and certainly a prerequisite for any cybersecurity insurance policy. And so specifically as it relates to the cloud, you have to verify you are who you say you are. And so multi-factor authentication does that in a various number of ways. This notion of SMS or a text message is one. There are others, but certainly you have to confirm someone's identity before allowing them access to your environment.
Yeah, and then kind of to step up the level of complexity, what we see in tighter managed environments is the use of controls like conditional access, where we might be asking or querying, hey, is this an approved device? Is the device safe? Is it coming from the location that I expect it to be in? Is it all of a sudden trying to log in from some foreign country and it's impossible travel, that they could have never moved locations in an hour? Things like that.
Really important from a geographic perspective as well. And then the single sign-on component, right? For a otherwise simplified experience, if you will, more that's in line with what users want to do and need to do from that perspective.
Yeah, and it's interesting too, because single sign-on, kind of a benefit of a couple of these pieces and kind of integral. You kind of need multi-factor authentication and whatnot to be operating properly to get a really good, solid single sign-on experience. But it seems to drive or be a prerequisite to drive SaaS adoption if you're looking at software as a service platforms, that It's a good way forward, and it kind of simplifies not only the employee experience, but onboarding and offboarding of employees so that that's done in a safe manner. It's a little easier to decommission apps if there's a departing employee, if everybody's on single sign-on. So yeah, that's an interesting aspect. And we've kind of talked about this a little bit already, but I'll just quickly cover this, which, the insurance carriers especially are driving this, which is, yes, they want to see multi-factor authentication, but they want to see it all over the place. They want to see it for identity, like we've just finished talking about, but they also want specific call outs for folks that might get exception policies sometimes, but MFA for admin access. Does your IT team or your managed service provider also have an additional layer of MFA? If you have a VPN or some type of remote access solution, are you using it for that as well? If you have employees that are just email only, make sure that they still are protecting that, because of business email compromise can affect people all throughout the organization. And then they're asking some ancillary things like, are you using a password manager? And is that password manager also protected with MFA? And I think all of this kind of adds up that we're trying to position these safety nets or these safety measures around getting our data estate together and protected, right? Because if we're going to start to explore things like AI and Microsoft Copilot and ChatGPT and things like this, we kind of really need to make sure that we've got all the doors locked tightly, right?
Yeah, absolutely. When you're allowing folks into your environment from these various areas, admin, remote, or email, you still authentication is key. I mean, particularly when you're talking about AI, and you can go through and review the level and amounts of data, it's even more acute that you need to establish identity and establish a person, authenticating them by that way. So all of this plays a factor when we talk about MFA.
Agreed. So let's shift our gaze towards infrastructure, kind of, I think what most people kind of identify as the things that are most tangible to them. Identity is sometimes an interesting construct to consider, but everybody can point to a firewall or an antivirus or an endpoint security solution. So a lot of times what they want is, and this kind of falls in line with some of the compliance frameworks like the CIS Top 18 is, have you identified all your devices? So do you have an active firewall, and do you have a review process for it? Are you using an endpoint protection solution, something we used to call antivirus, but now has evolved in something a little bit more sophisticated? But is it being managed? Are humans managing it, or is it just a set it and forget it type of solution, which you don't really want that. You want someone actually actively managing it and responding. Do you have that full inventory of your devices, your applications, the data? Do you know where everything sits? Because if you don't know where everything sits, it's really hard to secure it. And then is all your data encrypted across all your devices? And then backups, encrypted backups, tested backups, and then MFA protections around those backups. That seems to be a pretty common thing, but I think a lot of people spend a lot of time on kind of the physical infrastructure piece because it's very tangible. What are your thoughts on that, Rob? Especially as it relates to EDR, it seems like there's a lot of confusion on, I had antivirus, but now I need EDR. I don't know what that is.
Well, EDR is just a more advanced virus protection or endpoint detection and response system, right? So it leverages in many cases AI and machine learning to understand if there's an anomalous sort of activity on your endpoint. But what I find really interesting about this slide is the notion of defense in depth. And from the perimeter, you can look at an active firewall all the way down to the endpoint when we look at endpoint detection and response, and finally encrypting your data and ensuring for its backup and also its access control through MFA. So it's not just one control that's safeguarding your information, it's a myriad of controls to provide that defense in depth or layer defense, as we refer to it as. It's really important to have these to reduce your attack surface.
Agreed. And as we move on to, let me make sure I got that right here. Yeah, just a second. Make sure I got that. I did. Okay, sorry. Thought I skipped a slide. So when we move on to kind of security operations, so we've got these protections in place, or hopefully we're working on getting those types of protections in place, getting those backups in place as well. Um, some of the common things that we've heard in some of these surveys is, so, well, tell us about your security operations. How often are you patching? Do you have automated patching in place? Are you installing updates? Are you using certain tools to do that? Do you have security event logging? Are you using a SIM tool? Do you have a security partner or an internal security group that's providing oversight? Do you have a security operations center? Is kind of the, and very commonly abbreviated as a SOC or SOC services. Um, are you following a particular security framework, whether you're in a compliance environment or not? Some people just still follow one of these security frameworks in order to have the best posture. So are you doing that? Um, do you have an incident response plan? And is it tested? And do you have that as a policy? And are you educating your employees about it? And then lastly, some processes around employee onboarding and offboarding, like I had mentioned. If you have very specific, you kind of need specific policies and perhaps some automation around that, because that eases it, it eliminates or helps eliminate mistakes being made, misconfigurations of devices and applications and rights and things like that. Um, but as I take a zoom out look of this, Rob, there's a lot here, and it kind of speaks to needing a security partner if you don't have a big shop full of security analysts sitting in your office, right? You kind of need a partner in order to accomplish a lot of these things.
You're absolutely right. The strength of a security operations center is its ability to monitor 24/7, 365. So that SOC is available to you as an extension of your business to do just that, with a myriad of tools to understand what's happening, to give you that visibility and what's happening within your environment. As Dan mentioned, there's a number of things here to look to with policy, with a SIM platform, to pulling correlated information. But the strength really relies on those folks in the SOC who are there for you at all times.
Yeah, I think it's a great summary. There's a lot of noise too, right? The SOC operations groups, they're dealing with a lot of telemetry coming in, and they have to kind of separate what's real and what's just noise, and it's a tough job.
Yeah. We absolutely, we call it signal to noise. The signal would be the valid event or incident that may take place, and the noise with all of the telemetry that's coming in to be able to understand what's actionable and what isn't.
Yeah. And you need a really talented team to know when to take action and when not to. I mean, you can get alerts all day long, but when do you stop and go, hey, hang on a second, we got to pay attention to that. So
well said.
Yeah, it's fun. And then the kind of shifting our gaze towards the end users, the employees within the organization. Certainly, probably one of the larger themes with cybersecurity insurance has been to implement, especially to protect against business email compromise and phishing, is to implement security education, security awareness education. And so we're seeing that becoming more common, usually with some level of testing and perhaps some remediation training, which nobody likes, but kind of seems to be necessary. You fall for that phishing email and that test, and then you get to go sit in a 15-minute presentation.
Really important information, though, to have these campaigns be activated for your employee base so that they can make better informed decisions as it relates to these phishing attacks. As we mentioned earlier, they're the prime threat actor vector to get into your systems to compromise a user's credentials, username and password, to get into a system. So it's vitally important to have these campaigns available to understand who are what we call repeat offenders and who those folks may need additional training. So,
well, and I think it's a product of everybody in every industry is super busy, and we're moving very quickly. And sometimes mistakes just get made. You just think that's related to that transaction I'm about to do. So let me log in. And it's really some of that security awareness education isn't technical training. It's kind of common sense training. Slow down, read this carefully. There's some banners here you should be paying attention to. Perhaps your boss isn't asking you to go buy $5,000 worth of gift cards on a Tuesday for no reason, things like that. I mean, Absolutely. Some of it sounds like common sense, but I can see how people get in a hurry and they're just trying to do their job. And so I think it's an important piece just to kind of touch on with education and build the human firewall, as a
Yeah.
colleague of ours would say. So
And the bad actors are always trying to get that emotional component for
yeah,
you to take that action, right? So
yep, usually has a sense of urgency in there. Yeah, for sure. So kind of as we move on in our journey, one of the things that we've seen as a common theme also is they want to make, whether it's an investor or an insurance company or even a standards board, they want to understand how are you doing? How are you measuring your posture, and are you improving that posture over time? So are you doing monthly vulnerability scans? Hopefully at least an annual vulnerability scan, but we advocate for monthly. Um, for sure, an annual network security assessment, which maybe would, rather than just a snapshot in time, perhaps build a roadmap of improvements that you can adopt over 12 to 18 months or something like that. Um, Penetration testing, which is a slightly different than vulnerability testing, perhaps a little bit more attack based. Vulnerabilities, kind of looking at existing patches and things that might be missing of known vulnerabilities, where penetration testing might be a little bit more active, trying to compromise a system. But then from that, understand where we need to improve. And they want to see improvement on those gaps. Like if we do have some vulnerabilities and whatnot, or if we're working within a security framework, they want to see that you're making progress. And I think that's always been a challenging piece. Like, first off, understanding vulnerability assessments and penetration testing. Sometimes that's just, whoa, that's weird. To most business owners, that sounds very odd. But um, how do you see a lot of approaches when it comes to vulnerability testing and kind of measuring progress over time? What do you think, Rob, as far as kind of some takeaways there?
So yeah, what this speaks to is really KPIs, or key performance indicators, of your progress to a more mature cybersecurity state. And so whether we're talking about vulnerability scanning, where we're looking at weaknesses in your environment, per se, on, say, your operating systems, and we all know that Patch Tuesday is a real thing when it comes to Microsoft and other operating systems. Where do you stand with that? What is the risk based on some of the things that are found? More importantly, as Dan mentioned, what are you doing about it over time? Because tracking progress is really important. Perhaps you can't patch immediately, but it does need to be documented as to what your plan is to install a patch. As we look at other things here, penetration testing or network security assessments, therein again lies a notion of where are your weaknesses, and what is being exposed, and what are we doing about it to fix it. So it's an overall notion of maturing your posture to strengthen your overall cybersecurity strategy. And these techniques are all involved in doing so.
Yeah, and it's interesting too. I've heard excuse me, I've heard of a couple instances where sometimes an insurance carrier might have a application that you're filling out, but they might not be asking the most clearest question, or asking the question in the clearest way, perhaps not allowing you to answer it in a way that you feel provides the proper evidence. And a couple of pundits in the industry have encouraged us to say, staple that to include it. Do a couple page write up on your journey, where you're at,
Yeah.
what your improvements you're planning for the next year, and some of the things that maybe it's the internal group that you've put together to monitor security or to work on security policy. They want to see that, and that
Yeah.
can actually affect your premium. Like, oh, well, we weren't asking that, but thanks for that additional information. It sounds like you have your act together. You have a plan to get your act together.
Yeah.
um, I think that has a positive impact on some of those review processes.
Absolutely. There's no perfection in the assessment process, but they do, as you mentioned, want to see progress towards your final state, if you will.
Yeah, for sure. Um, all right, so we're tackle the beast, which is data. Um, where's all your data?
Yeah.
How are you securing it? And so there's a lot of confusion around data and whatnot. And I want to start off by saying there's a distinct difference, and there's some misused terms in the industry and in the press, that everything is if something happens in security, it's a breach. And that's not necessarily the case. Um, Most security events are simply security events. If there's a problem, sometimes we would call those security incidents. If there's actual disclosure or leaking of data, then that might be considered a breach. And so I want to make sure that as we use some terms like this, that we're kind of identifying. So as you read news headlines and things like that, there are certainly a lot of breaches out there. There are far more security incidents, and there's just a whole bunch of security events that we have to pay attention to. But as it relates to data, we have to kind of take a good look at managing our data estate. And I know that's kind of an odd term for some folks, but really, when you look at a particular business, where is all the data? How is it being used? How are you kind of fencing it in and with the care and feeding of it? How are you archiving data? How are you backing up data? All these sort of things. So certainly there are certain regulations that vary from state to state on how data needs to be handled. But commonly, questions that we see on insurance questionnaires and investor questionnaires are, do you handle sensitive data? Now, that's got a kind of specific definition itself as well. Every employer handles some level of sensitive data because they have employees and they have healthcare data and they have personally identifiable information. We're not just talking about that. We're talking about, are you in a business where you're processing credit cards? Are you dealing with health records, legal records, anything like that where it might be considered truly protected information? And usually the threshold around whether you have to take certain actions is how many records do you process on a monthly or annual basis. So it's really, really kind of scores the business and profiles the business to say, this is based on this. Yes, you are a healthcare provider. You're doing X amount of transactions. This is absolutely something you have to comply to. So that kind of guides us. But why don't you talk about these last couple of data encryption and data loss prevention, and then we can kind of hit the last couple together.
Certainly. So yeah, if we're talking about protecting data, we need to understand if we're leaking any data. So leaking meaning, is it going outside of our organization? So data loss prevention, or DLP as we refer to it as, are technology solutions to understand if sensitive data is leaving your organization. It does so by way of understanding the type of data that may be traversing your firewalls, and typically through an email system. As far as encryption goes, it's very important to provide for the confidentiality of your data required for HIPAA and other sensitive types of data. Encryption at rest, that would be when you store data, and encryption in transit, where we're providing for a VPN, or whether it's be on a website protected by a security certificate, TLS or SSL. And so these techniques are very important to provide for the confidentiality, whether you're storing, processing, or transmitting information for sensitive data.
Yeah, and I think it's pretty common too for us in once we get there in the security roadmap to enable those data loss prevention rules to say, hey, you're about to email a document that has sensitive data, it has a social security number, it has a credit card number, it has something else that we've labeled as sensitive. Right. But then I can do things with those rules. If that's normal, then I can say, well, then this automatically has to be an encrypted email. Or I can say, you can't send this based on the sensitivity that's of this data that's in this email.
Or based on policy, based on our policies that are configured
Correct.
through the tool itself. So that's an excellent point that you make, Dan. And that's the beauty of DLP technology. It prevents, mistakes from happening, where you may, if you send out greater than 500 healthcare records, that can be construed as a breach, and you have to report it. So that's something that's really necessary when you're in those types of environments.
And then kind of rounding out our access to data, are you putting in proper access roles? So do you have a rights-based, least privilege approach to accessing data? So, if you've got a junior employee that works in accounting, they probably don't need the latest figures on M&A from the CEO. If you have somebody that's in the engineering department, they probably don't need access to HR data. And so having the proper roles and restrictions in helps bolster that for sure. But then also, are you labeling sensitive data? I'm going to put a little virtual asterisks on that, because we're going to come back to that when we talk about AI. But are we labeling sensitive data, whether that's PII, personally identifiable information, or PHI, health information, but also perhaps it's just intellectual property,
You bet.
or sensitive things that we want to protect. So, all right, wanted to move on to the next one. So here's the big one that everybody kind of shudders, and it's policy, because very few businesses have proper policies. A lot of folks will start off with either a privacy policy or an acceptable use policy, that they hope covers a lot of ground. And with acceptable use policies, you can cover a lot. But some of the components that we've seen is questions asked about, do you have a password policy? Do you have a mobile device policy? Are you allowing other people to bring, your employees to bring in devices of their own? Or are they all company managed, or is there some blend between that you've established? With everybody working remotely and just a mobile workforce, do you have remote access policies? If you do have a security incident, do you have an incident response policy like we talked about before? Related to data, what is your data retention policy? If I have data that needs to be retained for a certain amount because of regulatory requirements, great. But if I don't, or even if I do, what is my data disposal policy, so that I'm not holding on to too much data? So there's some pieces around that with data retention. Certainly with phishing and fraud, we've seen the need for a wire transfer policy, because so many people, just get taken on those phishing attempts. And then kind of some rounding it out, some, what are you doing with your old IT assets as you're disposing them? Are you destroying the hard drives? Do you have certificates of destruction for that from a e-recycler? Do you have third parties coming into your environment, like an accountant or contract workers or anything like that? What are your access policies around that? Do you have a communications policy? Not only how to communicate within your organization with clients, but in the case of a security event, or a security breach, as I was talking about, or a security incident, what are your various communication strategies? Who's being notified, and when, and how, and what's the requirements, what's the timeline, and all that sort of stuff. So that's a whole bunch of policy.
Yeah. So policies are really important because they define what will be your cybersecurity strategy. And they do that by defining what your risk tolerance will be for your organization. All of these play a role in defining just that. And so they basically define what people can and should be doing and what they should not be doing. And that's based on risk. That's a risk conversation. And Dan talked about artificial intelligence. That becomes really important these days because of the vast amounts of information that AI can cull through and to digest and understand what's out there in your organization. You wouldn't want folks to have access to certain things, certain documents within an organization, yet AI has the promise of evaluating so many files and documents. So it becomes really, really important to have least privilege in place, access control in place for all employees and members of the organization when we speak about AI.
Yeah, for sure. And certainly data governance, which is a little beyond the scope of this presentation, but data governance, labeling sensitive data and having rules around how we handle those sensitive documents, pretty much a prerequisite for proper use of business level artificial intelligence. And one of the things, so there's a lot there to unpack, but without getting lost in the weeds on it, one of the simplistic approaches for building an AI policy is decide what platforms you're going to use and restrict the use of other platforms, because literally every tool is starting to push AI into their platform. And, ChatGPT is a very popular solution, but there are some instances where you might be inadvertently sharing sensitive data or corporate data that you wouldn't normally share on a public platform. And so we have to be very careful about that. So just having some written policy and some end user education about, hey, we're going to, like, for instance, you might be consuming Microsoft Copilot, Microsoft's AI platform within their Office suite. We might have a policy that says that's the only AI you can use. Anything else has to go through a review process. It might be that simple, and just having that initial step um, guides employees like, oh, I guess I can't use this other tool that I wanted to use, or hey, I've got like I'm an avid user of HubSpot. They're starting to roll some AI tools in there. I had to go through a process of having that reviewed, and because it's got a good use case, it's got a good business case for it, but we have to be careful about how we use it. So
Absolutely.
it's just the latest wrinkle. That's why I have it highlighted in blue. It's the latest wrinkle in policies because the industry is ever changing. So
Definitely.
okay, we're bringing this in for a landing, everybody. I promise. Um, so one of the last things that they kind of want to understand is kind of business operations. So we've talked a lot about tools and policies and posture and data and encryption and all kinds of fun stuff. But some of this all has to be looked at from a higher level of, well, tell me a little bit about your business. Do you have a chief information security officer? Do you have a privacy officer? That's especially for public companies, that's going to be a requirement. And in certain industries that are regulated, that is a requirement. Are you doing business continuity planning, and do you test it? And we'll come back to that because that's a hard one. Do you have dependencies on outsourced platforms? Now, a lot of folks are on Microsoft 365 or on Google, and those are certainly outsourced platforms. But I think they're also referring to, private cloud where you might have some co-location of data centers that maybe are not 100% in your control, but you've got some servers in a rack, or maybe you're leasing some space on a server or things like that. We want to understand that. If you're doing any sort of hosting or e-commerce, and certainly that plays into a variety of things, including PCI compliance. And then usually what we're seeing both with insurance companies and investors is, have you had a breach, an actual breach, like I was talking about before, within the last 3 years, or were you denied coverage for some reason in the last 3 years? Because if you haven't, there's plenty of people that have. It's not like this big black mark, you know. But it comes back to showing progress. Yes, we got denied 3 years ago, but look at the steps we've taken since then. That type of a conversation or that type of approach can certainly get you back in the running for that. But let me jump back to the business continuity plans and testing piece of it. I think this is a common thing that we're starting to see a little bit more traction on, Rob. A lot of folks have embraced cloud backup. They understand the value of it, that they need to back up all their data. But in the case of some of these security incidents, that backup might be the last line of defense. But when a security incident happens, a serious security incident, maybe it's not a breach, but maybe it's a crippling security attack that you've got encrypted laptops and desktops that are no longer usable, your business operations are down. Tell us a little bit about the importance of having a continuity plan. And certainly even with like natural disasters, it might not even be a security incident, it might just be a natural disaster. We've certainly seen our fair share of those in the last couple of months.
Is really important. And I think you're alluding to ransomware, where there's encrypted desktops, and we've all heard that in the news, over the last months and even years. So the way to have an ace in your pocket, if you're a poker player, is to have a valid backup. Not only a valid backup, but one that is tested, tried, and true. You can recover your data. From a BCP perspective, that's vitally important. It's not only having your backups, but in the testing process, can you bring back your data in the necessary time to restore business operations if you have customers per se, as guided by your service level agreements? Really important to understand that, really important to plan and test for these occurrences, because it's one security incident away from happening. And how one would do that is to conduct security incident response plan testing by way of tabletop exercises. And so what happens there is there's a simulated attack that is conducted, and basically the incident response team, as well as other members of the organization, participate in role playing based on your security incident response plan as to what actions would be taken to prevent data being absconded with, the recovery and response mechanisms necessary to restore your business operations. Really important testing, really important exercises, and they're vital for business operations.
Yeah, tabletop exercises they're tough to pull off. They take time. They do require a time investment, but man, they're super beneficial. They're a big eye opener. When people go through that, they're like, "Oh, we're not ready. Like we have to shorten this up a little bit. We need a smoother process."
Exactly.
So I bet a lot of you out there are going, "Wow, whoa, this is a lot to handle." And some folks might be saying, "What are you guys talking about? This is just so complex. How am I going to tackle this?" Um, and you know, at Sourcepass, we kind of approach it from a holistic standpoint. So, short, quick plug about Sourcepass. We have a tendency to take a holistic approach to this, putting the right pieces in place, whether that's strategic guidance, the right level of technical support, getting a solid group of professional services engineers involved to make some of those transformations within your environment, but also properly managing your network, getting the right managed security, whether that's the tools, but also the personnel, like I said, the SOC services and some of the security advisory services, so that you have a roadmap, that you have a path forward. And this is certainly our approach, but we would hope that most mature service providers would also have a similar approach, and the services that they offer as well. But just wanted to kind of highlight this slide of you should be seeing this breadth of service from your service providers in order to tackle these challenges that we've been talking about today. But let's talk about next steps, because I don't want to overwhelm people with too much complexity. And really, this isn't just one big giant project and all of a sudden it's done. This is an ongoing effort, right, Rob?
Absolutely. Yeah,
Yeah.
vigilance is key, and it is an ongoing life cycle effort, if you will.
Yeah. And so what I always encourage clients to consider is, first off, establish a very strong strategic partnership. It might be with a managed service provider like Sourcepass or somebody in the environment, in the industry, but it might be with multiple groups. You might have a very capable MSP, but you need somebody that's a little bit more specialized in a particular brand of compliance because you're in a specific environment. But establishing those partnerships is key. Then you really need to build an internal team. We've talked a lot about internal policy, making decisions on systems and solutions, but also end user education and things like that. That requires you can't just dump that on a service provider. Service provider can provide you resources and help you drive that, but you need an internal team that's taking control, that's at the head of the crowd, telling everybody where we're headed. And I think that just drives some really solid business decisions. And like you were just saying, it's a journey, right?
Yeah.
You just have to start shoveling, and eventually you'll get there. But the threats don't stop. The complexity never gets less complex. This is something that sometimes it's tough to get over the first part of it. It's a lot to do in that first year of really tackling a framework exercise, or just getting everything shored up. A good managed service provider will help you get there, but then it's improvements over time and it's constant maintenance, right? It's an ongoing thing.
What I would add to that, and the focus should be people, process, and technology, where relationships are key with your people, as well as with your advisors or strategic partnerships. Process is always important to understand who's doing what and why. And then finally, technology solutions to enable all of that, right? So that you're able to detect, able to respond, ultimately able to recover. The three strengthen each other in a continuous circle, if you will, and all provide vital importance to the overall cybersecurity strategy.
Yeah, it's not just products, right? It's not just
Right?
buy the right thing and it solves a problem.
No,
It requires that people work together. It requires that you build a strategic plan, but also that you tactically execute it and make improvements over time, right?
absolutely. Continuous improvement is key.
Um, so that kind of takes us to the end of our presentation. I hope that was helpful for everybody. If you do have questions, please go ahead and put them in the Q&A, and we're happy to answer them. I was going to also mention that we've got a couple of things to share with you that I mentioned at the very beginning. One, we have a survey that will be headed your way. Thank you for participating, first off. We'll have a survey headed your way where we ask a couple of questions. We'd love your feedback on that. We will be posting recording of this webinar so that you can check it out, share it with others. Give us just a day or two to get that done, and we'll get that posted. And then certainly, I would encourage you, if you're interested in connecting with myself or with Rob, we've got some QR codes here. If you want to snap a picture of that, you can find us on LinkedIn. And certainly you can reach out to us through our website. So I wanted to say thank you to everybody. We got a couple of Q&A, couple of questions here. I didn't even see them. I didn't refresh my screen. I've been so busy doing that. Let me see if I can bring us
I could
back.
take the first one if you'd like, from Tanya.
Yeah, go ahead.
So the question is, how hard is it to balance high quality security while maintaining efficient usability that doesn't hinder a business's operations? That's a really good question, and a poignant one, because we need to all recognize that security solutions support the business. They should not hinder the business. And so it's important from a perspective of whether it be a technology solution or, as we offered earlier, people or process. The goal is to strengthen the business and to enable its capability for its customers. And so the way we look to achieve that is to have our customers fully informed on the what, where, and how for a solution, and the actual technology that's providing for that strengthening of cybersecurity. So that's how we do it, and we look at it from a people, process, and technology perspective. Hope that answers your question.
Yeah, and I'll just add in on that a little bit. Going back to what we were talking about at the very, very beginning, kind of cloud identity and multi-factor authentication and single sign-on. That's a great illustration of actually leveraging technology to improve that employee experience, and it hinders things a lot less because it's a simpler way. Once it's implemented, using a fully baked single sign-on solution that has things like conditional access, multi-factor authentication using an authentication app and not just SMS. Once you actually take that step and do that, which is not hard to do, it's very achievable in a relatively short amount of time, no matter what size your business is. And it's the number one thing you can do to protect your environment. But by doing that, you actually improve. It's easier to get to once you're authenticated, it's actually easier to get into applications. It actually speeds business up a little bit. So it's a great use of security, because sometimes you raise the security fence high and it's harder to get your job done. In some of these cases, it's actually faster. So looks like we have another question too. With 600 employees, what percentage of them is dedicated to cybersecurity specifically, and is that number growing? I feel like I see cybersecurity matters on the news a lot more than ever. Well, you're right. There's a lot, as we illustrated at the beginning, there's a lot of attacks continuing, and a lot of folks that just they're either falling prey to it because of circumstance, but a lot of it's just because they haven't had the time or the proper guidance to invest and really shore up their defenses. So you're definitely I think you'll see that and continue to be in the news. I think you'll also see, we also see things like, here comes the holidays, and there's going to be a lot that, and it's a little bit more consumer based, but we still see it in business too, that people get busy and frantic during the holidays in business as well, and fall for scams, email scams and whatnot. So as you approach the holiday timeframe as a consumer too, be careful, be vigilant, use approved e-commerce websites, because even though you might get personally compromised, that can have an impact also to the business that you work for, or you work with. So that's a big piece of that. As far as our company size and how many exact employees I have, Rob, maybe you have a better view of that. We have quite a few people.
We do. Yeah. So we absolutely have a strong focus on cybersecurity with our SOC, and so they're well-trained, certified folks. We're always looking for talent. So there's a huge commitment to our security posture and strength as an organization. And so from that perspective, we value the solutions and details that we offer our customers, and it's a real priority for us.
Yeah, without being able to answer the percentage directly, just because I don't have that data,
I
I
don't
can tell
either.
you the interesting thing about a service provider at our scope and size is that we have individual teams for most every security function. So we have a full-time internal security operations center that runs 24/7 and is global in nature. So that's a huge differentiator for Sourcepass, certainly, but it's what you would expect of a top-tier provider. We have a separate team that does security advisory, the counseling and the consulting to get you through a security framework exercise or meet in regulatory compliance. So we have a separate team that just focuses on that. We also have a separate team that just does projects and implementation, and sometimes that deals with the implementation of security tools like EDR and firewalls and SIM tools and things like that. So we have a definite division of labor and division of responsibilities. And at the scale that Sourcepass is, that's a great privilege for us. When you look at smaller service providers, a lot of times it's the same team members wearing multiple hats. That's just out of necessity. I was there myself with my smaller organization before I joined Sourcepass, so not a knock on the smaller firms out there by any means, but certainly it's an important thing to have a conversation with the service provider, make sure that they have the right staffing, that they have the right services in use. Very common for service providers to use an outsourced security partner to bolster their team. So their team might be really good at doing systems and technical support and projects, but they might be using a third party to do that everyday monitoring of the security environment and even some of the advising on security and compliance, the advisory services on compliance. That's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. In fact, that's more common in the industry than you would think. The whole piece of the industry has been built around SOC as a service, as it's known. So great question. A lot of answers in your question. Hopefully we answered it properly for you. But yeah, we got a couple more questions as well. Info to share on HIPAA breaches. Oh, useful link on some HIPAA breaches. Do appreciate that. We'll take a look at that for sure and share if that's appropriate for us to share in our follow-ups. But I think HIPAA is probably one of the most commonly encountered pieces of regulatory restrictions that people run into. Every time you go to your doctor's office or your dentist or your eye doctor, you have to sign a HIPAA release. There is policy and workflow in process right in front of your eyes. So that's where that comes from. So that's good to see.
Absolutely. Those 18 identifiers are really important. They need to be protected, obviously, under the HIPAA statute.
Yeah, for sure. Well, with that, we're just 30 seconds or so away from wrapping up. I want to make sure that we stay on time. I want to be respectful of everybody's time. I really appreciate everybody joining me and Rob for this webinar. Hope it was informative for you. Like I mentioned, it's October is Cybersecurity Awareness Month, so stay vigilant. Go jump on a couple other webinars, learn a little bit more, share it with your colleagues, share it with your business leadership. And if there's anything we can do here at Sourcepass to help you along that journey, please visit us at sourcepass.com. Happy to do that. We do have a ongoing learning series, and these digital transformation series webinars happen about every other week. You can get to them by going to sourcepass.com/events. You can sign up there. You can see what's upcoming. We've got some great titles coming up, great webinars coming up in the next couple of weeks as we round out the end of the year. And we've got some great stuff planned for 2025. Thank you, Rob, for joining me. I really appreciate you.
My pleasure, Dan.
And thanks everybody for joining us. And thanks to Kat on the back end for being our virtual host for our webinar. Have a wonderful day, everybody. And thank you for joining us.